In July of 2014, I did a garden tour of my permaculture property here. So here we are a year later. So I'm going to try to take a very similar course that I did last year, just to show you how everything's progressed and what's new and what's changed. I'm at the top of the property where I planted a timber forest a couple of years ago, and this serves as a windbreak, fuel in the future for wood and nuts and wildlife habitat. You can see a lot of the trees, especially the locusts, have really gotten quite a bit bigger. Walnuts have gotten quite a bit bigger. Here's our flock of chickens. These are all layers. A lot of them are relatively young, haven't even started laying yet. And they graze these upper slopes, probably the upper acre and a half of the property or so, in between the swales. And the nice thing about having them on the upper part of the property is their fertility washes into the swales, which feeds the trees, which migrates down the hill. This is midway down the slope between two of the really long swales that go all the way across the property. As you can see, the vegetation has grown nice and lush. Every 6 feet or so you'll have trees, and I come through here once a week or so. I'm not really doing much maintenance at all, apart from just walking through and just making sure that the weeds don't overtake the trees. Early in the season I came through and I would do a little bit of weeding when things were really young and added some wood chips around the trees, but other than that it's not really much maintenance at all. You can see the bee shelter there, the back of the house, my pile of wood chips that I get from a tree company for free. And this is looking downhill, down the slope of the property. You can see another swale. Swales are a little further apart here as the topography starts to flatten out a bit. Beehives and shelter. We had 2 hives last year. Now we've grown to 3. All of the hives are pretty strong right now. This is looking down slope at the wildlife pond. Doing fairly well. Beyond that is a zone 3 food forest. There's swales going down the hill. More food forestry. So the pond is just a clay-lined wildlife pond. It's only a couple feet deep. This area was a perpetually wet area, and putting the pond in is just adding to the diversity. It's really close to the beehive, so I see bees coming down here to haul water, and that's been a nice addition. These are the hugelkultur beds I put in, fairly large hugelkultur beds. I put in melons and squash. There's a lot of perennial fruit that I put in from seed, and I've got some of it to come up, not as much as I would have liked, but some of it has definitely come up, and that stuff is kind of buried amongst everything. But I go through here every week and just make sure that those little trees and shrubs that are coming up aren't getting totally overtaken. This is looking down slope at the bottom of the property towards the end of the driveway. More food forestry down here, zone 3, maybe even zone 4. Looking up at the more food forestry with the hugelkultur beds that we just looked at just beyond that. And then you'll see Wildflower Meadow here. Beyond the Wildflower Meadow is more food forestry. And this little part is mowed a little bit because I've got a friend that has a little garden right there, so I mow that a little bit for him. And then swale here, which is the bottom swale that the main feature fish pond overflows into. And then the bottom lands, which is all Wildflower Meadow. This is the bottom right-hand side of the property along the road where I've got another young timber forest that I put in a couple of years ago. And this one is going to provide wind breaking, wood, habitat, nuts and berries. You can see the road there. Eventually these trees and the bamboo along the fence will screen all that. But for now, we sort of have to live with the noise. I think there's about 60 or 70 trees in this area. This is the old chicken area. I actually turned part of the chicken area into a victory garden. So one half is chickens, the other half is Three Sisters garden. And then I'll rotate the chickens in and out and let them provide all the fertility. This is a smaller flock than the one we looked at in the upper part of the property. I'm on the top of the wall of the fish pond, and just below we have a swale, trees growing on the swale, and beyond that is all Wildflower Meadow. That whole bottom area got planted in wildflowers. I'm standing on the spillway of the silt pond, and as you can see, that's where the water comes in from a couple of swales and a French drain, and also from a gray water wetland area. And the silt pond overflows into the feature pond. So I planted some squash and some strawberries over here, and you can see the white on the plums. That's kale and clay, and then it overflows into the fish pond. And I've built up a little kind of like a waterfall area, so it helps to aerate the water as it gets into the pond. Now you'll notice from last year we've got a lot of cattails and bulrushes that we didn't have last year. Obviously I didn't plant those, they just showed up, and I'm glad they did. And early in the spring, before we had enough vegetation, we started to get some algae, and once the vegetation grew big enough, the water's been nice and clear, and so it's provided habitat for the fish and also helped to purify the water. I planted this young food forest and gray water setup. The gray water setup went in last fall. The plants form went in just this spring, so they haven't really grown much. They're not really doing any of the filtering that I want them to yet. And the young food forest is just planted this spring, but the plants are doing nice. Got apricots and bush cherries and sea berries and Siberian pea shrub and a nice ground cover of clover and cilantro and quite a few other herbs. And you can see the clay on the apples and cherries, and there's tons of comfrey and gumi over there as well. So this is a nice little zone 1 type food forest. Just to give you a closer look, this is the kale and clay on my apples, and it's done a pretty good job keeping the codling moth from destroying all of my apples. This is zone 2 food forestry, so we got Asian pears and nectarines and apricots and sea berries and quite a few other things. And in between the food forestry is kind of like a wildlife buffer between the food forest and my zone 1 garden. And basically what it is, I planted a native wildflower meadow. And so what's going to happen is come wintertime, when everything dies back, I can get the tractor in where all the wildflowers are now. And that way I can bring in my wood chips or whatever I need for the garden without having to have just grass there as a laneway. So it gives me a laneway with habitat for predator insects and pollinators that can service both my zone 1 garden and the food forest here. Here's one side of the Keyhole Garden, the zone 1 Keyhole Gardens. This is some Three Sisters garden here. And just basically I just rotate my companion plantings through here. You can see the other side of my Wildflower Meadow laneway. This is the other side of the zone 1 garden. You see the greenhouse, and these are hugelkultur sun traps. And I plant some perennials with the annuals. So I've got huckleberry and blueberry and gumi and honeyberry and quite a few other berries in there with the annuals on the hugelkultur. And here's my grapevine here. It's more zone 1 garden through here. You'll see, anytime you see corn, I'm planting beans, squash, or watermelon or something with it. This is still zone 1 garden. This is the mandala garden. One thing I did do differently is I added quite a few perennials in here with the annuals. So we've got sand cherry and high bush cranberry and honeyberries and gooseberries, and there's also some shipova and jujube and quite a few other stuff I'm probably not thinking of right now. You can see here on the eggplant is diatomaceous earth. In the past, I've always had trouble with flea beetles on my eggplant, and this year I've used some diatomaceous earth, and I've got the biggest eggplant I've ever had. And they're just there's tons of eggplant waiting to be picked. This is the herb garden, relatively close to the house for easy picking. You can see that blue barrel I'm using for compost tea. And my herb spiral, hard to see all the herb spiral now because everything is nice and mature. I did a shot last year with my kiwi, and so I wanted to show you how much the kiwi's grown in one season. This gives you an idea of how quickly it can grow. And one thing that's cool is this year, for the first time, we actually have some kiwi actually on the vine. So just to give you a peek, so you can see a little bit of kiwi there. This is the upper right corner of the property. You can see 2 swales, and those span the length or the entire width of the property. So you can see just a little portion of it here. As we span down, I had a few compost piles from an earlier project, and I planted some Three Sisters gardens sort of just around the property where the piles were located. See the kale and clay on the apple trees. There's another swale here. You can see there's a little gravel pipe there that goes behind the house, collects all the water, moves it around the house, connects to a swale there, and then connects to the gray water wetland, and then overflows into the silt pond, and then the silt pond overflows into the feature pond, and there's also another swale there that overflows into the feature pond. To the right of the greenhouse you'll see the Keyhole Garden. Beyond that you see Wildflower Meadow. To the left of the greenhouse you'll see grapevines, culture sun traps, more zone 1 type garden. Now we're starting to look into the food forest and back to the zone 1 mandala garden. This is just a different angle of food forest, mandala garden, and fish pond. This is the upper part of the property behind the house. So you see those 2 long swales that I mentioned earlier. Those run the entire width of the property. Another Three Sisters garden. You see up top, going up the hill there, at that top area, that's actually a timber forest. So it's getting bigger. Still young, but definitely getting bigger. You can see the chickens over there and the electronet fencing, and then beehives and shelter. It's a big pile of wood chips. Got a tree service that drops them off for free, which is really nice.